So our next panel and our first one of the afternoon is on reinventing the upstream infrastructure of food. I'll turn it over to the moderator of the session, Noel Kullavanijaya, who is with Equilibrium and a friend of mine and known for many years, and very happy to have him lead this panel. Noel, take it away.
Thank you, Nick. And I'd like to first welcome my panel members, Allison Kopf, Himanshu Gupta, and Nick Maderas. So welcome, everybody. This panel is going to get right into where we think food is going, which is controlled environment agriculture, or CEA. The backdrop to this is if you subscribe to the thesis of where the convergence of the demands really of consumers for fresh, safe, available, and then increasingly affordable, and converging with the backdoor trends of where population is growing, urbanizing, increasingly concentrating where they live, notwithstanding what's transpired in the last 12 months, which is causing some gyration in where people are moving to for more space, but also want to be close to where their jobs are. So we're going to see many more things like that gyrating through the systems. And converging all that again with climate change and the demand for resource efficiencies of all types, which we can get into. Our shop at Equilibrium very much are the subscribers to the notion that indoor growing is the future. The change in the supply chain, and more broadly, the change in what we euphemistically call the infrastructure of food, where we are making food, producing food closer to where it is being consumed in a more efficient way. And indoor growing enabled today, increasingly so by technology, where we can now produce food not dependent on the best land, the best climate, and less exposed to what's going on in outside weather. So in the old days, just to give you a little anecdote, still about 80% of our lettuce that you guys on the East Coast consume in winter still get grown mostly in California and Arizona. They get on a truck, courtesy of Interstate Highway 60 years ago, and travel 6 days. Pick Monday, and the following Monday may get to your shelf. Today, so why is it California? Well, it's or Arizona, because certain times of the year the weather's great. There used to be plenty of water, or when frankly we thought water was free, and not so much concerned about the cost of transport, because when interstate highways were put in place, it was relatively cheap. But 6 days after it was picked before it shows up. Today, technology allows us to grow food. If you really go extreme in vertical format in one of the boroughs in New York, if you go a little bit further, you can grow flat land in Pennsylvania, pick the 4 o'clock in the evening and be on the shelf by 8 o'clock the next morning. All done indoors in environment that's traditionally been hostile to growing lettuce. You can only grow lettuce in the summertime in Pennsylvania, maybe 2 months a year tops. Now you can grow it 365, 24/7. That's indoor growing. And there are many different genres of indoor growing. So the drivers, increasingly limited land, climate change, increasingly acute labor availability, the demands or the pull, market demands, consumer change in taste, more educated consumer, and if COVID-19 told us anything, convenience of home delivery of all types. And then, like I said, increasing availability of technology that's made this possible. So with my panel members, I'll ask them to go through a little bit of their perspective. We won't spend a lot of time on bio and background. We'll just go right to what their businesses are doing and their perspective on what's going on in controlled environment ag. So with that, let me ask Allison Kopf to weigh right in. Allison?
Thank you for that. And I think it was a great way to start the panel. And I believe that if you're talking about the Bright Farms location in Pennsylvania, it's where I used to work 10 years ago. So a little bit about us and our company. We are Artemis, and it's a software company that's focused on enabling the indoor ag industry to actually scale efficiently, sustainably, profitably. I've been in the indoor ag industry for the better part of a decade, actually probably 11 years now. So sort of saw that evolution that happened in 2010, 11, probably up through about 2015, which we'd call maybe phase one of the venture-backed world of indoor ag, all the way up through where we're at now. And what we built our company to do was solve the technology infrastructure layer. So where we talk a lot about indoor ag contributing to the infrastructure of food as a whole, we talk about Artemis as sort of the underlying infrastructure for enabling those businesses to run. And our thesis is that if you can have each of the individual farms operating in this profitable, sustainable way, then you can start to look at systemic change, and you can start to talk to all these points that we were talking about earlier around sustainability and sort of land transformation and all these types of really wonderful things that we can dig into. But first, at the core of it, indoor ag is still a little risky, and as is all agriculture, and we have to think about that risk. So what our software does is manage everything from start to finish of a plant's life cycle and in the operational sort of life cycle of a farm. We manage production, scheduling, and people management, compliance, food safety, traceability, all throughout, from input to plant to package to shelf, all the way through that supply chain. And I think one of the things that I want to dig into today a little bit is just around the technology evolution and how important usability of technology is, because this is something that we haven't really talked about as an industry yet, because partly we haven't really been at scale yet as an industry, right? We, if you think back to the wave in 2010, 11, a lot of the facilities were actually technology companies just as much as they were growing technologies. By nature, people were developing their own LED technology, their own software technology, because it didn't exist yet. It wasn't sort of off the shelf capable to deal with the challenges that are unique to indoor ag. And now we're in a place where that technology is coming off the shelf. It is sort of de-risked. It's been around. We started our company 6 years ago, and now there's a lot of companies that are in maturity phase. And one of the things that I think is really challenging for technology companies in particular in this space is just around, how do you get people to use it as a sticky piece of equipment, right? How do you get somebody in their software every single day so that you can really understand their workflow from start to finish? And so that's something that we focused a lot on, was how do you get people from owner to hourly worker on the farm using the system? And we've been pretty successful at. We have over 1,000 users now. We are a global company. And we've amassed a pretty wide data set that we now in turn use to actually enable services down and upstream for input providers, thinking about accelerating R&D for products, all the way through, if you're Costco or Target and you're thinking about sourcing materials and you want a sustainable supply chain, and you want to think about traceability, right? Those are all things that we have to think about, but you can only do when somebody's actually using your system all the time. And just to give a little bit of a sort of context for our user span, we have everybody from API developers who were former software engineers to, fifth generation farmers who, one of our customers had never opened Excel before, and then became an active user of our system. And so that's all well and good, but I think it's really important to think about that in context of this industry sort of getting up from the ground up, so that we can start focusing on those big systemic changes we've been talking about. So I'll leave it there, and excited to dig into Q&A.
That's great. Thank you, Allison. And we'll come back and pick your brains a lot more on the range of technology you're seeing, and where the technology could take control environment, agriculture and food overall. Himanshu Gupta from AI Capital comes at it from a slightly different dimension, which is the production optimization rather. So let me ask Himanshu to share his perspective from AI Capital.
Well, thanks, Noel. And so our company name is ClimateAI, but I think you were very close, Noel. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Himanshu. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ClimateAI. I won't go too much into the background, as Noel said, but after having spent 14 years in the field of climate change, globally, both in public and private sector, I used to work at the intersection of climate and energy up to like 4 years ago. And then I moved into the intersection of climate and agriculture since the last 4 years. And I'm seeing some interesting parallels where you cannot, especially in context of CEA, you cannot look at all these three modules in exclusivity, right? And climate, agriculture, and energy are more closely interlinked than we realize. And I'm interested to dig in further into that concept. But as far as climate AI is concerned, as I think as Howard Chow mentioned, so we call ourselves as an enterprise climate platform for supply chains. Now, what that means is we help our companies optimize production quality and safety of their food supply chains with respect to extreme weather, anywhere from day out to 10, 20 years timeframe, by generating actionable insights. And those actionable insights basically generated by AI are in three dimensions, which is with respect to as climate is changing and as extreme weather is getting more volatile, what is the kind of food that you could grow? How would you grow it with respect to the input constraints that you have? And when would you be able to grow it? So there are three questions that we answer: what, how, and when. So our platform has three modules, which is module number one is a weather and climate backend, generates extreme weather insights anywhere from an hour out to 10 years and 20 years out globally at any latitude and longitude. Second is the impact module, which is a cloud-based machine learning platform that integrates with our customers' ERP systems or production systems, and then converts these extreme weather insights into production uncertainty numbers, quality uncertainty numbers, or like certain optimization decisions. And third is the software layer or the communication layer, which sort of helps our customers communicate these risk insights or disruptions happening in supply chain, both upstream and downstream in one shot. So we are currently working with all the top players in food and agriculture, anywhere from retailers to agrochemical companies and top food companies, and even like one of the largest agriculture asset managers in the world. Now, we have recently moved into CEA, and what excites us most about CEA is the impact that AI can produce. And I'm happy to talk further about that, Noel, which is because CEA is one sector where there's a lot more of data generated every hour. And two, there's a lot more feedback loops available for the AI to learn and get better every time. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to dig in more.
Yeah, and my apologies, Himanshu, brain procedure there, but I will come back to you on one thing you talked about. Actually, two things. Question of scale. You talked about system-wide solution, and then the other you talked about is the range of horizon of the work you deal with, which is consistent with really one of the key thematics of food production, which is a long-term question. It takes a while to grow stuff, even though in the greenhouse you can grow food much faster cycle, but the solution we're looking for our fruit system is a set of long-term solutions. So I'll come back to that. Nick Maderas, Nick, take it away.
So I co-founded Agnetix with my partner, Dr. Ihor Liss. Agnetix is a horticulture equipment manufacturer, and we make heat recovery LED horticulture fixtures. With heat recovery, we change the thermal energy flow significantly. And we know from our farmers that switching to liquid cooled lights can reduce facility energy by 50%. With the recovered heat energy, the use of some facilities can be reduced further up to 75%. So the question I get asked a lot is, which one is best, the indoor or the greenhouse in terms of energy efficiency? And often the bigger question is actually, when we look at the energy flow, is the question of, is it vented or unvented? So if there's only a 25% savings with greenhouse compared to indoor, that's actually surprisingly close. And so the electricity time of use, the seasonal resource fluctuations, external market pricing factors around growing over winter are all major factors in looking at indoor versus greenhouse growing. So the question ends up largely being about local factors. And like we've heard from Himanshu and Allison, these local considerations are something that we're all really looking closely at together to get a total picture of. One other thing that Agnetix has done is with the decreased cost in sensor technology, we've added some remote sensing technology to our lights. We help the farmer have a look like a mini eye in the sky at what's happening at the canopy in real time. And we use the light in many creative ways. So from remote sensing to crop steering assistance to making lettuce more fleshy and tasty and colorful. We do pretty much everything the farmer wants to do with light. We can do black light fluorescent imaging, have Burning Man style garden parties, and some fun stuff. And we're fully IoT with shared API, with controls, environmental controls, irrigation. So the whole system really works together.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to come back to you on energy system, because our experience at Equilibrium, where we have invested in a couple hundred acres now, a couple hundred hectares now of horizontal growing facilities around the country, the single largest expenditure that we have to manage is energy, far and away. Energy, not just for heating, cooling, and lighting, but also water management, harvesting, planting, plant management, and the logistics around that. So I'll come back to energy management in a second, but energy being a big piece. Let me move to some questions, and let me go back to you, Allison. Given the work to do, I'm going to start with something that may seem simple, but a lot of people talk about, and a lot of headline attention in CEA, a little bit of introductory question for those listening. People tend to think about CEA as either cannabis or vegetables. Given the work that you're doing with a range of clients beyond leafy greens or tomatoes, or for that matter, cannabis, what else are you seeing as interesting areas that controlled environment ag is pushing or exploring?
Yeah, sure. So it's really interesting, actually, because if you think about when I started working in this industry in 2010, 11, I remember distinctly my grandmother even said to me, like, "Oh, hydroponics, are you selling, to marijuana growers?" And you're like, "No, lettuce, we're doing lettuce and tomatoes and these types of things," right? And everybody's perception was sort of like hydroponic meant cannabis. And then it sort of shifted into hydroponic now means vegetable and sort of cannabis, and it's expanding it, right? And the perception is changing, but also what was growing was always vegetables, tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers we see in greenhouse all the time. It's pretty standard. It's just this sort of rise of leafy greens has brought a lot of attention to the market as a whole, which is really good. So, to answer your question, we've worked with well over 5,000 different crop varieties. So we've seen lots of things grown indoors in some way, shape, or form, whether it's greenhouse or in a sort of fully enclosed vertical operation. But what we traditionally see from a business standpoint at scale is tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, lettuce, herbs. Now we're starting to see berry production. We see cannabis production, of course, floral, right? The industry, if you watch the trends that have happened since sort of the 60s, 70s, is you had, in the tomato industry, none of the tomatoes that we used to consume were grown indoors pre-1980 or so. Now about 40% of the tomatoes that we consume in the United States are actually grown in greenhouse operations. So that shift was massive, from 0 to 40% in a really short time frame. And we anticipate that the same sort of trend is going to happen. And I think you talked about this a little bit in your opening remarks, but we really do anticipate that same trend is going to happen across leafy greens, herbs. We see it across cucumbers, peppers. So we're going to start to see that. And with the sort of increase in demand for these types of products, as we start to expand our diets into sort of a heavier rotation around vegetables, that's only going to keep growing. What I think is probably the question that everybody wants to ask in this space is, like, will we see commodities be grown indoors, and will we see sort of broad acre type things be grown indoors? And I don't actually think the answer to that really, I think it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter. The market is so big for produce, and the benefit to moving produce into indoor ag where it should be, like crops that are fast growth cycle, benefit from the crop turns, are physically short for vertical operations. It doesn't really matter as much for greenhouse, but those crops that tend to benefit from indoor production should be grown indoors. And we'll start to see that move happen. But the benefit to the system as a whole is that for every acre that we move indoors, 10 free up. So now we can think about regenerative ag with sustainable grazing, protein, all those types of things combined. So it's a really systemic approach. And I think you will start to see more things grown indoors, but I don't think you're ever going to get to a place where we're growing corn, wheat, soy indoors, because it doesn't right now at least make sense.
I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes to push that a little bit and to give you time to think about it. Some of the other panels earlier in the day talked about non-meats and alternative proteins. So I'd like to get your perspective on what's happening there from a production point of view.
Sure.
But in the meantime, Himanshu, let me ask you, given your experience at Climate and your own work in energy, what and this is hopefully helpful to some of the other startups in the room who are trying to figure out where to evolve and adapt their business model or solutions. What parallels can you draw from other sectors you've worked on, whether it's renewable energy in the past or something else, that would be applicable, that you see trends that are repeating in the CEA? Speaker? Oh, sorry, microphone. Thank you.
Sorry about that. The biggest cause for transformation in the energy sector, whether you look at it from a metric of sustainability, clean energy, or energy security, is solar and battery combined, period, in the last 10 years. I remember like when in 2012, when I was in the Prime Minister's office in India drafting plan for renewable energy for India. But since from there to now, the cost of solar and batteries combined have reduced by 10x. At the same time, the performance has gone up 4x. And that has led to, if you look at batteries as an example, what does battery do is basically helps grid becomes more reliable, so that if the production fluctuates every day, every week, every season, it helps grid becomes more reliable. It helps produce more clean power, because solar by itself cannot sustain the daily demands for electricity, because it fluctuates quite a bit. But then that's where batteries come in, and then it also helps you produce locally. Right now, we are seeing solar home systems along with batteries, and Tesla also moving into it, basically changing the game altogether. Now, more and more these localized grids production systems are being installed everywhere, both in developed economies and developing economies. Now, the parallel between agriculture and energy is I think of a lot of similarities between the electricity grid as well as the food grid. Right. So what batteries did to electricity grid, CEA could actually do to the food grid, where it is helping. We already know about this, and of course all the panelists are from the same industry. It is already helping us, grow local, grow more reliable food, more quality food, and cleaner food, right? However, the question is, given the push from the Obama administration in 2008, that came to the energy industry, the battery industry, that helps to massive cost learning curves and reduction in cost as well as increase in performance. Can we achieve the same in CEA with high-tech greenhouses? And I think the answer is yes. It's it's a lot less complicated, I would say that, and as compared to the chemistry that is being deployed in batteries and whatnot. It's just a question of is there like an equivalent amount of research funding available the way it was being provided for energy sector?
Right, and it's an interesting question about funding, because just in the last 12 to 24 months, we've seen just oodles of dollars coming in to look at ag tech, but I'm not sure if they're going to all the right places that would compel what you just described, cleaner, more reliable, and local production and distribution of food. Some of the other panel spent some time talking about the demand side of things, which we'll come back to. So that's great parallel that I think there are lots of lessons that we can apply to where each one of us is evolving a business model. Nick, let's see, I'd like to get your perspective on on the technologies, and I could ask this question of Allison too, but I'll ask of you. You're inside the greenhouse looking at energy management, starting with the lighting, but more, as you said, more and more in the greenhouses themselves. What other technologies are you seeing in the greenhouses that you're being asked by clients or customers to get your arms around and manage to optimize the productivity of the greenhouse?
So other technologies, I think that community renewable energy is a big part of it. Like Himanshu was saying, I think that there's a lot of synergies, as we've been talking about, with energy and agriculture. I think clean energy guidelines in this space are evolving pretty quickly now, and there's a lot of work happening in different states. And understanding how we can actually look at meter data in the industrial and agriculture spaces is important, and it's important to be proactive about being involved in setting those metrics. I think we've found that if the industry isn't involved in those, then sometimes codes get developed which actually have 180 degrees opposite effect of what's intended. So I think we can potentially really benefit from embracing transparency in data and in really celebrating the and showcasing the successes that we're having in different systems. And that's been shown to be pretty effective in creating some great local competition about who can be most efficient in different sectors. So I think that our data is important to sort of celebrate and promote.
Thanks, Nick. And I'm going to open to Himanshu and Allison also about other technologies. But for now, let me go back to you, Allison. I actually have a couple of questions. One was alt protein, or beyond vegetables, beyond well, to be specific, lettuce and tomato and cucumbers.
Yeah.
Other food types. What are you seeing from clients and customers' point of view?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're thinking about indoor production, there's probably two sides to the alt proteins world. One is the insect side, right? Of course, we are seeing a rise of insect production in controlled environments. So this started maybe 7 to 10 years ago when it was really just crickets. And now you're starting to see alternative sort of even insect production and thinking about this and how we focus on producing insects in a controlled environment ag. It's actually a very similar production cycle to plants. So it works really well for the environment. You're also seeing sort of the plant-based side and how we can do things in a just a better environment, so that all the benefits that everybody's spoken about it being almost a lab-like environment because you have the ability to control. And this has always been the question around indoor ag was, can you grow anything in 4 walls? Yeah, of course you can. It comes down to what makes most sense profitably at scale to actually choose what you grow. But we're starting to see, now on the plant-based side, things like mushrooms, of course, have always been grown in sort of controlled environments-esque, and now they're being grown in these sort of higher tech automated indoor ag producing facilities. And that's being used for things like alternative leather and those types of things. So you can actually see more and more alt meat, but also alt animal type operations. And then can you use indoor ag as a lab space for growing things that need to be more focused ingredients, right? And so ingredient production in a controlled environment is going to by nature happen. So I think those are the two avenues where you see this sort of plant-based side for alt protein, and then also sort of that cricket and now more and more insect production as well.
Right. For those of you listening at home and thinking about genetics and genetic solution, take note. We're definitely seeing a lot of that. One of the early panels, I think, Howard had conversation with was also the difference in behavior of what people consume around the world. Because alt protein for us in the U.S., we think about impossible meats. Alt protein in in Asia, they think about, synthetic crab legs, which is completely different.
Yeah.
Something,
And actually, by the way, to that point, from the genetic side, so anybody that's listening that's in the genetic side, like that question of what can be grown, what should be grown, how do we think about alt protein? Some of that is that we're just currently limited by the germplasm that exists in the world right now, right? And so if you can kind of put your dream hat on and start thinking about what comes next in genetics, that's when you can start to play with the options that we have available to us, because we're still using genetics from field ag, but just applied to indoor ag. The second that starts to flip, and it's starting, there are companies focused on it on the small scale side and then also in the big companies. But the second that starts to flip, you can start thinking about unlimited sort of possibilities for ingredient generation and all these types of things.
Right. Thank you. As somebody said earlier today too, that in the U.S. again, we think about impossible foods, or impossible meats, or something like that, and in India, most people don't eat a lot of meat. So, completely different genre of what synthetic protein means in that part, all protein. But since we're talking international a little bit, Himanshu, your thoughts on CEA rather, the controlled environment, agriculture, and food globally. Most of us think about U.S., but tonight I believe there's some audience listening from China and from East Pacific. This morning we're a bunch of folks from Europe and Middle East. So, your thoughts on internationalness, on international opportunities?
Sure, and I would start with with the comment that Allison made and you also made, like, and growing up in India, pulses and peas used to be my triple diet every day, and alternate protein to me was chicken back then. So that's a shift in cultural attitudes. So what I see, like, again, I look at it from a lens of climate change, and I see that as like a driver as well as demand generator for CEA globally, and more so in emerging economies, where we are seeing like climate change not only impacting the yields, as we are seeing, like, all about as we see globally, but more importantly, nutrition, as well as safety of food. Right. I was shocked to see when I was talking to a senior executive at Mars that almost like close to 20 to 30% of peanut production in India is very susceptible to mycotoxin infestation. And mycotoxin basically is responsible for 1/3 of the cases of liver cancer in India.
Oh, wow.
Right. And two is, if you talk about nutrition, right, we are seeing like how climate change and like rising CO2 concentration, yes, that's increasing yields of rice, but that is coming at the cost of iron content in rice. Now, rice being our staple diet back in India, you see 1 in 2 teenage girls in India are already anemic, right? So, and third, of course, is on the yield side, where are we growing enough? I was shocked again, like we are still importing, pulses from Canada, right? So for our domestic consumption. So if I look at these 3 factors, and I see like CEA being the solution, and going back to the analogy with energy sector, where the impact that solar plus batteries has had transformational. 6 years ago, there were around 60 million households without proper and reliable supply of electricity. Today, the number is 0. And the answer is solar plus batteries, right? If I apply the same lens now, like, okay, if I want to grow food which is local, tailor-made to my nutritional needs. For example, I want something which is high in iron content because of the iron deficiency we are seeing across women in India. If I want something which is tailor-made to my taste and is more reliable, yes, CEA is the answer. And the question is, at what cost? And are we willing to sort of, from a global perspective, from a UN perspective, willing to fund solutions that can bring down the cost of the CEA? And of course, it doesn't have to be fully automated, even like semi-automated or like, level 1 tech greenhouses to a level. Can we bring down the cost to a level at which it becomes affordable? If we can, I think CEA would become as transformational as solar and batteries became in emerging economies.
Right.
Can I jump in there? No, sorry, we're running short on time, but I did have a question I was eager to ask on this to follow up on the global question you raised earlier. So can you speculate a little bit about where we will be when will CA become, quote, a mature industry? And when it is mature, what is it going to look like in terms of scale and penetration, including globally? For example, you just mentioned India. I mean, where is the low-hanging fruit in the rest of the world when it comes to CEA? Is it places where, obviously, where there's lots of energy need and not a lot of local agriculture, and Middle East? I don't know, or is it a country where basically like India, where the needs are vast, but it's still very poor. So I just, can you speculate on some of those issues?
So I can quickly start, and then I know like my fellow panelists can join in. I think if I look at India, the opportunity exists from a perspective of energy cost, right? If you look at like the eastern belt of India, where the cost of electricity is as low as 1 cent to half cents per unit, because that's hydroelectric. That's the hydroelectric belt of India. I can say the same for China as well. So if we have those, eastern belt of India, where also like there's around 20 to 30% of population lives, and it's also like there's a lot more demand for food, locally grown food, nutritious food, and also the infrastructure is available in terms of land and in terms of electricity, cheap electricity. I see no reason why it cannot be done.
Yeah. Howard, let me answer that. I think the answer in part is really on the demand side in terms of who can afford it, right? It costs, I checked this out in China, and I think it's roughly the same in India. It costs still about $1 million an acre to build a tomato facility. Mm-hmm. Advanced technology. Now you can build medium tech, lower tech at a much lower cost, but advanced technology, it's $1 million an acre. Plus the operating cost that what Nick's doing in energy management and in variable cost of input. At the end of the day, you're still selling vegetables, so the unit cost matters a lot, because what can people actually afford to eat? Right now, everyone, if you give them the choice, all things being the same, tastes better, fresher, better looking at the same cost, of course they'll buy it. Question is, what's the unit cost, right? Because otherwise, the businesses owning a facility won't exist if you can't do a proper markup. So if I use that as a lens, the near term, at least I'll share our in-house prognostication. East Asia is kind of the next frontier. Europe is pretty saturated, although interesting question mark on what happens in Central and Eastern Europe. But mm-hmm. East Asia is the next frontier for us, from an investment perspective. And then Europe extending down to the Middle East, but the Middle East is fairly small market, all things added. And then certain parts of India. Now, India is a big country, 1.2 billion people. So all you need is, 2 big cities and you get a lot. And so places like India and South America, Latin America, Central America, or Africa will be after East Asia. So East Asia would be East Coast of China, all the way down to Singapore. That's where we're seeing a lot of activities.
Great.
And to your question, when is it going to be a mature market? It's the capital cost curve, right? Parallel what's happening in clean, what happened in clean energy. I measured from a financial point of view is when does a cap rate drop below about 10%, right? That's when it gets mature. Because right now, the cost of equity to build one of these things, and wherever it is in the world, is in double digits, middle double digits, in the teens. When it drops below 10%, then you start having all sorts of people participate in a way that, it's kind of like solar. Solar it's 20 years ago, when you put the first solar up, it was 15, 16% IRR, right? Today, you're lucky to get 6. New solar. And that's when did it cross over 10% point?
Perfect. So I'm afraid we're pretty much out of time. Anybody want to say any last words of wisdom before we jump?
Well, the title of this event, this session was, so what interesting technology, what interesting strategies. I'll just throw one other technology in there. We talked about energy, we talked about control systems, we talked about AI. I'll also throw robotics in there, because one thing we did not get a chance to talk about in this discussion is the implication of labor, which is population movement, aging population, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's really hard to get somebody to pick tomatoes and grapes in California now, but the automation, this technology is still not there to pick grapes and tomatoes that can go on the shelf dependably. And that's the next frontier technology-wise.
Excellent. Terrific panel. Thank you so much for your remarks and insights.